I'm Cory Golob, KU1U. I recognize some folks in the room. Hello, Peter, Brad, Eric, and I was asked to talk about D-Star, which I'm a big fan of. Anyone who knows me knows I love D-Star, right, Peter? So it's a digital voice mode. Anyone remember the VHS Betamax wars back in the day? Well, times that by more, right? Because we have so many digital voice modes out there now, right? We have D-Star, which I like. We have P25. We have DMR. We have Fusion, also known as C4FM. We have NixDen, NXDN, right? When's the list end, right? It's just lots of mode. Now we have M17. Anyone familiar with that? That's actually an open source new codec that is new codec that's emerging. So tonight I'm going to talk about D-Star. All right. So has anyone ever heard of D-Star before? And I'm not going to be looking at you, so I'll need vocal cues. So just yell it out. Are people familiar with D-Star in the room?
Yes.
Yes.
Is it about a 50-50 or people are familiar with it and just haven't used it? I know I talked to Eric on there. I know Brad, you've got a 7100 I think you were using.
Yep, that's the club's Go Kit, the
Okay.
EMA. I've dabbled with it with that, and our 80-meter conversation that sounded like a phone call was remarkable, but I haven't touched it since.
There you go. We'll have to get back into that. So
Mm.
D-Star is actually, the earliest one that I can really recall of all these other digital formats. So D-Star stands for Digital Smart Technologies for Amateur Radio. That's actually what D-Star means. It was created out in Japan by the Japanese Amateur Radio League. So it's been around since 2004. And people always ask, well, why digital? Why should I use that over analog? And my reason for using it is I like what digital brings to the table. All right. So if you just want to talk, and there's nothing wrong with that, analog is your way to go, right? You're talking, you have your voice. That's fine. But digital brings multiple things simultaneously, right? So you have your voice stream. So you're talking, but you also have text data that comes across. So with D-Star, there's often two different streams. So one, the first that you see is your call sign and your name. It works out really well if you have a four-letter name. People who don't have a four-letter name, they'll just put in like the model radio they're using. And then after that, you can actually have a message that that goes after that. So, for example, my son, he's 10 now, Simon. I don't know if any of you know my son, N1URA. But if he talks on D-Star, it'll say N1URA. And then after that, it says Simon, Sabatis, Maine. So that's really great, especially for people, anyone in the room not good with call signs. I know a lot of hams who are not good with call signs, not good with names. So this is a really great mode to, have that if you really can't remember a name or something. It's right there in front of you. It's very narrow band. So if you're familiar with public safety communications, uh, there's like P25 phase two. So you have phase one and phase two, if anyone's ever heard of that. So P25 phase one is back in 2013, you had a federal mandate that required narrow banding on the public service bands. So it took 25 kilohertz, which was, the regular analog bandwidth, and it cut it in half to 12 and a half. Well, that's phase one. So phase two is actually cutting it in half again, down to 6.25 kilohertz. So really, you could actually fit four D-Star repeaters in the same bandwidth of a regular analog FM repeater that's 25 kilohertz wide. So the big question, will D-Star replace analog? Hell no. No, it's another tool in the toolbox, right? It's just another mode, another thing to play with that interests us. We all don't have to have the same interests in amateur radio, right? D-Star isn't for everybody. Not everyone likes digital, right? If you heard Frank and I talking earlier, right? change is hard. Everyone wants change until you ask them to change. Then it's a different story, right? So it's just one of those things where some people like it and others don't, and that's okay. Analog is one of the last strongholds that we have, right? Because that is your interoperability. You take any digital radio, I'll joke with people and I'll say, oh, somebody's got a DMR radio and somebody's got a Fusion radio and somebody's got a D-Star radio. I'm like, oh, you got interoperable radios. They're like, no. I said, yeah, they all operate analog. They're like, oh, right. So you have to kind of think outside the box there sometimes. The other big question, right? Is D-Star expensive? Well, expensive is a relative term. If we're comparing it to Bofang's, then yeah, D-Star is really expensive. But when we look at the three, I'll call them the big three DV modes, D-Star, Fusion, DMR, D-Star really is the most expensive out of all of those. I would say DMR is the least expensive, which is probably why a lot of people have gotten involved with DMR because it's easier on the wallet. Your wallet doesn't take so much a hit. And to me, Fusion is that hybrid. It's really in the middle, right? It's kind of in between the DMR and D-Star price point. So yes, I would say D-Star, relatively speaking, is more expensive. D-Star uses an ambi vocoder chip, okay? That is what contributes to the larger cost, right? It's what gives it the digital quality. Um, but if you're looking to get into the hobby, I would actually look at some of the older radios, right? Like if you want a handheld, I tell people get like an ID51, right? People always ask me, "Oh, you're into D-Star. What do you recommend for a radio?" I want to get the they'll say they want to get the newest ID52 Plus or something like that. It's like, you know what? That's like $750 for a handheld, a dual band handheld. I'm sorry, I get a little heartburn over that. That's a lot of money. If you're gonna spend $750 on a handheld, honestly, go with the Kenwood D75, D74 because you can actually do way more with it, right? Those have built-in TNC. You can do packet, you can do APRS, you can listen to HF on sideband, CW. So, I mean, if you're gonna spend that money, I'm a bang for the buck kind of guy. But honestly, if you're looking at getting into D-Star to dabble with it, for a handheld, go with the 51. For a mobile, you can go with the older 80Hs, or really, the 5100 actually probably is the best way to go because it has a lot of features that I'll talk about later on. The other question I get is D-Star proprietary? Is it proprietary and is it proprietary to ICOM? No. Kenwood does make two radios, unfortunately, not a lot of them. I did hear that, I don't know if it's true or not, supposedly they're going to be making a mobile. That would be pretty cool if they actually took it from vaporware to a realistic item. But no, it's not proprietary to ICOM. Anyone can put D-Star in the radio if they want, but they really balk at, having to pay that extra cost of that DVSI chip. So DVSI is the company that makes that vocoder. So uh, is it proprietary? D-Star itself, the format is not. It's actually open source. However, the vocoder chip, DVSI has put a patent on that, and they've made it easier for companies to just say, "Hey, we did all the work. Put the chip in your radio." It's a matter of if the manufacturer wants to get on board. So here's some examples of different D-Star handhelds. This is an older PowerPoint, but these are all older models. The ICOM 80, 91, 92. I had the 92. It's built like a tank. Kind of reminds me of the HTX 202. Anyone remember the Radio Shack? Those are, it's built like a tank. I also have the D74, which it's like the Swiss Army knife of radios, honestly. It's really good. My only pet peeve about that radio, I find the transmit audio is a little hot. Uh, but besides that, I think it's an awesome radio. And then you've got the newer, quote unquote, newer radios where it has more of a menu system. So the older radios here that I was showing you, no internal GPS, okay? They had an external GPS if you wanted that option built into the microphone. The Kenwood actually does have the built-in GPS, and these newer kind of flatter radios compared to the older ones do have GPS built in, which is nice. Because with D-Star, you can actually, it transmits out your location. You can have it feed one way to the APRS system, so you can actually have all that data there as well. So that's kind of handy. Then it came out with different iterations of, the 51, the 51A, 51A Plus. They got a little crazy with having different models, but essentially the 51 is basically the same type of radio. Then you've got the mobiles. The 800 was the first one. I probably wouldn't recommend that one, but the 880, you'll notice the faceplate, if you're familiar with the 4100, well, it's there to the right. They have kind of the same type of faceplate. Those are nice if you have a vehicle and real estate is at at a high price. You don't have much room. These are nice because it doesn't take up much real estate. You can kind of remote mount these and it doesn't take up much room at all. 2820, that's dual monitor. So it's got a bigger head. And then the 5100 at the bottom there. That's kind of the go-to. That's the one that's actually in production right now, the 5100. If you're looking at a mobile for D-Star, that's kind of the go-to. Even having it as your base is good too. Really good radio, good audio quality. And then you have those newer radios have a DR function, which is nice. A lot of the repeaters are pre-programmed in. And you can also, for analog, what's neat thing is if you put in analog repeaters as well, you can do a near repeater function. So if you input that in your code plug, you put it into the radio, and you actually have the location of the repeater or rough location, you can turn on near repeater. It'll look at your GPS and it'll tell you how far away the closest repeaters are. If you're traveling, that's pretty darn handy. I find that a good feature. And then you got the ID1, which is for 1.2 gig. Probably don't have to worry about that in Maine. We no longer have a 1.2 gig repeater anymore. The one over in Brunswick got sold and it's down in Pepperell, Massachusetts now. But the thing about the 1.2 gig D-Star is you could actually transfer quote unquote high speed data, 128 kilobits per second, which in amateur radio, that actually is fast compared to, sending your 1200 baud or 300 baud packet. And then you get into the D-Star radio. So the neat thing about D-Star, you can actually use them on HF bands as well. So I have both the 7100 and the 9100. 9100 is right next to me right now. But I'll say my favorite radio I've ever owned is that 7100. That is a shack in a box, and it's great. It's actually set up in my son's room right now. That's what he'll use. But I'm looking at putting that in a Go box. And it sounds like that's what the club is using for their Go box. It's just a great, versatile radio, DC to daylight. So how do you access D-Star? All right. So the best way as hams, we want to go through a repeater. Unfortunately, in Maine, D-Star does not have a lot of infrastructure. There are very few repeaters. So I've taken over managing a repeater. So the Gray repeater over at the National Weather Service in Gray, the 147.045. I had a chat with the previous owner of that, Steve, K1MV. And I talked to him. I said, hey, how about we make this more versatile? He goes, okay, what do you mean? I said, why don't we just swap out the repeater and put it with a D-Star repeater? You can still use it on analog. And he said, okay, so that's what we've done. So the Gray repeater is a D-Star and analog repeater now. So if anyone's near that area, by all means, please use that repeater. That's why we have these repeaters. We want people to use them. You can also use a hotspot. Those became very popular over the last 10 years or so. Hotspot, if you're not near any repeater infrastructure, it's essentially like a femtocell in your house, right? They're very low power, like 10 milliwatts or less. And you can run multiple modes on those. So you can do D-Star, you can do DMR, P25, Fusion, any of that you can do on your hotspot. You also have a DVAP, which was kind of like the precursor two hotspots. It was a type of hotspot, and then the DV dongle, which is not actually a radio. It's essentially the AMB vocoder chip. And you plug it into your computer, and then you use your computer as the quote unquote radio with an internet connection. So repeaters, so that's like the version 2 repeater, D-Star repeaters, generation 2. Now they have the generation 3. So the generation 3 repeater is what is at gray. There's also a generation 3 repeater up on Streaked Mountain on 440. Joe, W1SK, has that repeater. And the nice thing about the generation 3 is it does the automatic mode select, like kind of like Fusion does, right? You can have it switch to whatever mode. So if somebody keys up in analog, the repeater switches to analog. If somebody keys up in D-Star, it switches to D-Star automatically. So besides the commercial repeater, so the top picture is a commercial ICOM repeater. The bottom is a homebrew repeater. So for example, that's a Bridgecom Systems repeater with a MMDVM style board on it. Actually, that's like the old DV repeater board or MMDVM. Those are the two ones that are kind of used now. I think the DV repeater's kind of gone by the wayside. I think the proprietor of those in Canada has done away with them. I think he switched to doing MMDVMs now. So ICOM repeaters, you purchase them or you can build your own repeater. The benefit of a factory repeater is those actually do what's called call sign routing. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. But I know people who've also built repeaters. So either way you want to go is fine. It's getting it on the air, building the infrastructure. That's what's important. So we typically find the repeaters are a 2-meter 440 or 1.2 gig. So for repeaters, you actually have to have a unique call sign on it. So in the analog days of having repeaters, you know how you have a club call and you put the club call on the repeater and multiple repeaters, and that's fine and good for analog. Well, on D-Star, you can't do that. You have to have a unique call sign per repeater. Well, I'll say per repeater per band, right? So you can use the club's call, say twice or 3 times, right? You can have one for 2 meters, one for 440, and one for 1.2 gig. But you can't use a user's call sign because that will actually screw up the call sign routing. What call sign routing is, let's say I wanted to talk to Eric, and Eric was traveling. He was on a train and he's out in Colorado, right? I don't know where he is, but I want to talk to him. So what I can do is put in his call sign, and when I key up, the system finds where Eric last keyed up. So let's say he keyed up on a repeater in Colorado. It will dump my audio out on the repeater his call sign was last heard on. So that's a nice thing. I don't have to know where he is. It's a really cool feature, but I'll admit to you, it's seldom used. People don't really use that feature at all. And that ties to another question of, well, why do I have to register my call sign? When you use I'm sorry, Fusion, you don't have to register your call sign. Fusion is probably the easiest of all the digital voice modes to operate. There's really no learning curve. You put in your call sign, you put in the frequency, you're done. There's no learning curve. There's a little bit more programming involved in D-Star, but I think it's way less complicated than DMR. If anyone's ever uh, done a code plug from scratch, your head just about wants to explode. So, but those who are used to it are like, no, it's no problem. Because they're using it all the time, so they get used to the ins and outs. But there's a lot involved in creating a DMR code plug. With the D-Star, really, there's only 4 fields that you really have to concentrate on. The destination field, RPT1, RPT2, and your own call sign. We'll talk about that in a little bit. The other thing about repeaters, they have to be coordinated. So you have to go through NASMEC and, get a frequency pair and go through that process. And then the other thing with repeaters, we have three bands that are referred to as modules: Module A, Module B, and Module C. So we'll talk about that a little bit here. Here we got the slide here. So Module A is 23 centimeters or a hotspot user. Module B would be 70 centimeters for 40, and Module C is 2 meters. This gets a little confusing because that also applies to modules for reflectors. That's probably the most confusing part of D-Star, is differentiating between the two. So uh, band modules, so up on Streakin' Mountain, that's on 440. So the call sign is the repeater call. So KC1SBG space B, because it's 440. Now the gray repeater, that call sign is KC1UKH space C. It's C because it's 2 meters. So it's kind of small text here. Hopefully you can see it, but like this repeater here, it says C, but after it says 2 meters. This one says B, it says 440, so it kind of spells it out as well. So that's probably, a confusing part about D-Star compared to some of the other modes. When you look at a dashboard, here, so we're looking at um, a reflector. So a reflector is kind of another word for room. Like on C4 FM Fusion, you call them rooms. In D-Star lingo, we call them reflectors. So reflector 50, which is one of the reflectors I hang out on, that's like a New England based reflector. I'll hang out on reflector 50 Charlie, 50C. So you can see right on here the actual repeaters that are connected to 50C are K1HRO. So that happens to be the one that HRO in Salem. K1MRA, that's the Minuteman repeater down in Massachusetts. W1DSR and W1MRA, those are also in Massachusetts.
Quick question.
Yes.
If you wanted to talk to someone on a UHF repeater in 50, would you have to switch over to like 50 Bravo and not be able to talk to anybody on 2 meters on 50?
No, so that's a confusing thing. See, a module, so the module is the room, but it's also a band. So, for example, if Joe and I were just talking on the local repeater, we're just talking on the repeater. But I can link that repeater to 50 Charlie. And if you were on gray, you would have to link the repeater to 50 Charlie as well. Now, let's say you link to 50 Alpha and I link to 50 Charlie. We can't talk to each other. 50 Alpha is a different room. So think of a module as a room when it comes to reflectors. So
Okay.
50A, 50B, and 50C are three different rooms. They're not interoperable. So
So
if
the
you want to
modules
talk to me, I got to be on 50 Charlie. You got to be on 50 Charlie.
modules with correlating with the call sign is the band, the modules
Correct.
correlating to the
That is
reflectors.
correct. So K1HRO space B tells me it's that repeater is on 440, but it's connected to the room, which is a Charlie. It's really confusing. Not gonna lie. It is kind of confusing. So this repeater here, K1MRA, is a 2 meter repeater. W1DSR is a 440 repeater. W1MRA, that's a 440 repeater. So W1CH down here in the remote users. So up here, the link gateways, those are all factory repeaters. Down here, if you're on a hotspot or a homebrew repeater, you'll actually show up as a remote user. So W1CH, Louis, when he keyed up, he last transmitted on module C, which is room 50 Charlie. So here's some different things here. So this is just kind of looking at the last heard list. So you have all the call signs, and then we talked about that text message. People have different things programmed in. So this one put in Manuel in Minnesota. Tim in Fowlerville, Michigan. So you put different things. You'll notice some call signs here have orange. If it is orange, it means you can actually click on it. When you click on it, it'll actually open up a Google map and show you their location at the time they transmitted. And that also does, as I said earlier, get fed over to the APRS system. So if you're building a repeater, you have to use a radio that can accept 9600 baud data. Or on some of these factory repeaters, what you're going to do is you're going to tie to the flat audio discriminator. That's what you have to attach to. Repeaterbuilder.com, if anyone's familiar with that site, is a good resource if you want to build repeaters. And then you need a device that kind of gives it that D-Star quality. So the GMSK node adapter, the Moencom board, we don't really recommend. I know some of them are still using them, but they did have some issues with them. Right now, the MMDVM board, that kind of is the main device that people are using when they're building these repeaters. And then you got to have a computer, right? Whether you're using a laptop, Raspberry Pi, little desktop that fits in a rack. Either way, but you got to have that computer, and then you got to have a software image for the D-Star. So there's different images out there. G4KLX is kind of a popular one. And now, I created this PowerPoint a long time ago before Pi-Star. Pi-Star is a very popular image for hotspots and repeaters now. So that's probably the most widely used one is the Pi-Star. And then you have to have connectivity, right? So people always say, oh, I need internet to use D-Star. You don't need it. You just need it if you want to connect up to different things. It's no different than if you used it if you're connecting up via Echolink, right? It's just a means of communication. You could use microwave linking if you wanted. You can have a standalone repeater. I mean, you can connect up to the mesh network. Linking is linking. It just depends. It's a convenience thing to use the internet, but you don't need it to actually talk on D-Star. D-Star is a local mode. The internet linking is a means of connectivity. So the hotspots, those are really popular. A lot of people have them, and they've really morphed over time. Now you've got the fancy hotspots that are portable, right? You know, back when hotspots started, you kind of had to tether it to your router. Kind of like when what was it, Magic Jack? Remember when Magic Jack first came out? You tethered your phone right to your modem. Same kind of thing. Now it's gone to where everything is more portable, right? You've got the open spots, right? Open spot has morphed over time. Now they have the open spot 4, open spot 4 plus, where very versatile hotspot you can put in your pocket and has a really nice user interface. So hotspot's very low power, and you can actually set it up for multiple modes. If you want to scan 2 or 3 modes at once, you can actually do that on some of these hotspots. If you wanted to build a what I call high power hotspot, and when I mean high powered, it's more than 1 watt typically. So you can use it. I know the Motorola GM300 radios were very popular for building hotspots, or you can use a radio that's already existing that has that 9600 baud data jack on it. So different ways you can do. All right. So just kind of a little diagram of how it works. You got the radio, you're talking into that radio that's going to receive it, goes through your node adapter and computer, and then through the internet. It's kind of a one-way thing. And the beauty of it is because it's not a repeater, you don't have to coordinate that. Okay. You can just have that up. It is kind of nice to coordinate with your neighbors and make sure you're not using a frequency that would be conflicting. But with NESMEC, you don't have to coordinate these because they're not actual repeaters. And then DVAPs, kind of the same thing. DVAPs I don't even think they're really made anymore. Hotspots have kind of taken over for DVAPs. And DVAP stood for Digital Voice Access Point. That was kind of like the birth of hotspots. It was a specific type of hotspot. And that's what they look like. Internet Labs made them. They made so the red one right there is the actual DVAP. If you have one that looks blue and there's no antenna on it, that's the DV dongle. The dongle is what actually plugged into your computer. There we go. It's right there. So you don't really find those anymore. Those were kind of replaced by these. Northwest Digital Radio made a USB. It had an ambi vocoder on it, and you can plug that into your computer. So these were nice if you're traveling a lot. You can kind of plug this dongle in, and then you can use software like Blue DV. If anyone's familiar with the Blue DV software, it works really well with these devices. So again, for using D-Star to its maximum potential, you should register your call sign in database. That way, when you're talking on the internet, your voice will go across. If you're not registered in D-Star, people will only hear a one-way conversation if they're, on the other side of the internet somewhere. And that happens, very often. Either people didn't register the call sign or they programmed their radio wrong. If it wasn't programmed right, then they only hear half the conversation. It gets kind of annoying. But yeah, register your call sign. And really, as I said earlier, the importance of registering your call sign is for that call sign routing feature. So you just go to register and the admins will take care of you pretty quickly. Once you register, you have to kind of go back. You have to log back in. And then you click on the box. And then in the RPT, you just put a space here. So you're sent instructions on how to do that. That way you get all set up and you're ready to go. Usually takes 24 hours to be registered in. So routing, it's really important how you program your radio. So we talked about the destination field. 99% of the time, you want to leave that in CQ, CQ, CQ. That's what you leave your radio on in that destination field. The only time you change that is if you need to link a repeater, unlink a repeater. That's pretty much the only time you'll change that. RPT1 and RPT2, those are how you go into the system and come out of the system. So what that typically is it's the call sign of the repeater. So RPT1, so if I was going through gray repeater, it's KC1UKH, which that's the call sign of the repeater, space C. It's C because it's 2 meter repeater. And then your RPT2, that's the same thing, KC1UKH, call sign of the repeater, space G. The G is important because G stands for Internet Gateway. It allows you to go through the internet. Now, if you were a private person, you didn't want to go through the internet, you would just keep it as C. But as a default, you should really put it as G. So that way, if somebody comes across and it's linked, everyone's going to be able to talk to each other. And then my is simply your own call sign. Routing is very specific. I really wish they renamed that you are a destination field. To me, I wish they called it a command line field. Really, because that's what it is. You're sending a command. Think about it as like a text command. That's actually what it's doing. It's text going across and it's performing a function based on what that command was in that field. So if you had 7 spaces in U in that 8th field, that's the unlink command. If you wanted to unlink a repeater and just keep it local, you can do that. Or if you wanted to link to a different repeater, a different reflector, I should say, you would unlink it and then relink it to something new. So for linking, there's 3 types of systems out there. You have REF, DCS, and XRF. There are 3 different systems. So the best way I can equate that is like Is your group really familiar with DMR? Is the club pretty well versed in DMR?
I believe a number of us are, but I wouldn't necessarily say the whole membership.
So if I said the difference between uh, DMR Mark and Brandmeister, you understand the difference, right?
I do, but I don't know if everybody in the room does.
So you have two different systems. So here's another analogy. You have a Mac and you have a Windows computer, right? Two different operating systems. They're two different systems. This is the same way. These rooms, so to speak, have different they live in different worlds. So Reflector 50 is different than DCS 50 is different than XRF 50. They're all different types of rooms. So they're on different servers. That's why they're different. So the standard ICOM uh, reflectors are REF. But then you have like the more open source ones, which, like the equivalent of Brandmeister would be your DCS or XRF. So if you're going to link to 50 Charlie, you put in REF 050, so that's reflector 50, Charlie, that's the module, and then L means you're linking it. Okay. Now, I'm kind of getting probably maybe over some people's heads with this, but just know in the radio, like the 5100, these are already programmed in. You just go to the menu and select 50, reflector 50, and it's there. I'm kind of going the old school. Like I learn better knowing the why behind something. So I'm kind of telling you more about the behind the scenes than what's on the front end. You could also link specifically to repeaters. So if I wanted to link to the KS1R repeater in Phippsburg, I can put the repeater call, which is KS1R. I put two spaces, the module number, which is B because that's a 440 repeater, and then L to link to it. We already talked about call sign routing. I'm not going to get into the weeds on that. You can also do what's called an echo test. So for example, if you're on 50 Charlie or wherever, you do, 50 echo. So all the spaces and then 50E, when you key up, KU1U testing, it'll actually record you and spit back your audio. So if nobody's around, it's a good way to tell how you're getting into the system if nobody is around to tell you. So that's kind of a handy little feature. I already kind of talked about repeat 1, repeat 2. This is going to be available for you. So this PowerPoint is really going to be more of a guide for you to sit down, really digest it after this presentation. Take the time to read through it and really learn and get into what this means. I don't want to bore you with all of this. I already kind of did a faster paced explanation of it. But the repeat 1, RPT1, is how you get into the system. Okay. Whereas the RPT2 is how you come out. Remember that G is the internet gateway. And then my field is your own call sign. So we talked about GPS data. So you have different streams. You've got a voice stream, a text stream, and a GPS data stream. So that's all what comprises all within that 6.25 kilohertz. So there's a lot of information in a small package. Again, we've talked about the text display. So if you wanted to put like Oxford Aries or Cumberland, was it ETC? Is that your emergency group? ETC? Did I get that right? ETC?
ECT.
ECT. Thank you. All right. So you could put that in there or something. And then you actually have text messaging. So if there's an app called the RSMS1A, it's a free app. You can either hard tether with a specific data cable to your radio, or some of the newer radios, you can Bluetooth connect your smartphone, your smart device to the radio. And you can actually send text messages, an actual legitimate text message, or you can do slow scan TV, so to speak. although it's not slow, it's actually fast at that point. You can send a still picture over the air. There's QSO logging, so you can actually log a conversation. It'll record it in MP3 format. The newer radios, so like the 51s, the 31, 51, you get like the 5100, all those, even the 7100, you can put in micro SD cards and you can record conversations if you want. CCS routing, we're not really going to get into that. I don't really think people really use that anymore, so I'm kind of go past that. Now, DRATs is something different. So this is great if you wanted to dust off that old TNC you had. You can actually use your TNC to employ DRATs, which is a software that goes over the RF, but you link it with the internet. You kind of bridge the two. And we call these, instead of linking to reflectors, you link to a rat flector. And you can send text data. You can incorporate WinLink messages. You do different chats. You can have your own private room set up for communication, or your regular email. So it's just a kind of a way to bridge RF and internet, but it's using D-Star and it's using well, actually, I don't think that's actually using D-Star. Well, I haven't used DRATs in a long time, so it kind of hit a lull. So there are people who are experts on that, and I tried getting connected, but some of the rat flectors have been discontinued for lack of use. But it kind of ebb and flows, right? Activity. Some people get interested and they go away and do something else, and they come back to it. But I do know that you can use the TNCs to transmit the data over them. So that's just kind of an example of DRATS files that can be send text files, images, different things. And here's a kind of an example of what the chats would look like. So people have some mapping data on there. All right. Dashboards. Let's see. How am I doing on time? Oh, I'm pretty close to being done here on my time. Dashboards really are a way just to see the big picture. There's different types of dashboards you can have. You have dashboards for overall users. You have dashboards for an actual repeater, or you have dashboards for a reflector. Okay. Different ones achieve different kinds of data. So here's kind of the 30,000-foot view. We can see all over the world where people are talking, and it'll give you an idea of where they're actually located if you wanted to link to them. This is actually looking at, when we looked at this earlier, this is looking at the reflector dashboard. All right. Let me just skip ahead here. We talked about data cables already. Here is the slow scan TV image you can actually transmit across. One of the D-Star specific terms, if something does not decode properly, we say, oh, you are R2D2, because it kind of sounds like R2D2 from Star Wars. So that's kind of a D-Star specific term. If you ever heard somebody say you're garbled in D-Star, they'd say you went R2D2. So what are the benefits? It's narrow band, right? So it's good for the spectrum because it doesn't take up as much space. There's some relative privacy, you have a lot coming to the table, right? Text data, GPS data, and the voice streams. You cross over to APRS. Just overall digital in general, doesn't matter what digital mode you're on. You have that knife edge. You're relatively better than analog to a certain point, and then with digital, you're either in or you're not. That's kind of the mysterious thing about digital, right? It's that knife edge. You sound 100% until you don't hear it at all. That's just the nature of digital communications. So lots of different things there. What are the disadvantages, right? I'm not here to say everything is happy and great. You know, it's a high cost, unfortunately. It is more expensive, you know. Um, they do put a high reliance of internet communication on these digital, and it's not just D-Star, it's all digital modes, right? Fusion, DMR. We have heavily relied on commercial internet. We really need to migrate to, mesh networking and having, bring back microwave RF linking. Not everyone cares for the quality of D-Star. It all comes down to preference, right? Some people like the sound of Fusion better. Maybe some people like the sound of DMR better. It's all what your preference is. And it's just, really a lack of acceptance by other manufacturers, right? It's mostly an ICOM game with a little bit of Kenwood. And then you've got just too many competing digital modes. We've kind of gotten away from interoperability to a point. So, there we go. I tried to jam in I think there was like 78 slides. So I tried to jam that in 50 minutes. So I got through it. There you go. Hopefully I did not bore you. Hopefully you learned a little something about it. I'll take any questions you may have for me.
I got one. You know if Pi-Star does cross mode with D-Star from say a Fusion or DMR radio?
So not with D-Star, unfortunately. I wish they would. The cross-moding I've seen on Pi-Star is DMR, largely DMR to Fusion and Fusion to DMR. But I haven't seen anything. So the only thing I've seen for cross-moding is with the open spots. And the preference is actually for the open spot 4. So open spot 3 will do it. But here's the difference between the open spot 3 and open spot 4. Open spot 3 converts it using software, which is inferior. Open spot 4 does it using the actual chip, the hardware, which is a lot better. The quality is night and day. So you can cross mode, and you know what? Maybe one of these times I can think of it, I'll get on the DMR net and I'll come in through the D-Star on an open spot 3 and you can hear the quality, and then we'll try to do it another time on the open spot 4 so you can see the difference in that quality. So the open spots are doing it, but the others do not seem to be doing it right now.
Thanks. Any questions for Cory? Very
Cory,
educational.
I put
Cory,
everyone
this
to
is
sleep by
Frank.
now. It's a lot of info. Go ahead, Frank.
What's your email address?
KU1U at proton.me. I will put that in the chat.
Thank you. You're a Mac user.
No, actually, that's Proton Mail. I'm actually not a Mac user. I'm Linux and Windows. I'm weird. I'm Linux, Windows, but I have an iPhone.
Okay.
Nerd.
I can't make a decision.
You're awesome. Thank you so much, Cory.
Yeah,
Well,
thank you, Cory.
If you have any questions, reach out. I'd love to, see people get more on like the gray repeater. That's probably the closest one for you folks. We are working on trying to figure out a better internet connection. We were using a SIM card. It was like $40 a month, and it just, for the lack of use on that repeater, it's a hard swallow for, you know what I mean? It's like we were hoping we'd get some internet access from the National Weather Service, but it's really a no-go at this point.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping there'll come a time where maybe we can revisit it and get it on the mesh network, and then that would allow us to do some connectivity, but we're still building out that mesh network system.
Will you be sticking around for an update on mesh when we go through our meeting minutes?
Yeah, I'll stick around for a little bit.
Okay. Before we jump into the meeting, I'm going to suggest we take a brief stretch break. I need to use the restroom. Then we'll get started.
Cory, that was an excellent presentation.
Hopefully I didn't bore you too much.
Oh,
not at
would you
all.
entertain doing that down the road for the Collins Amateur Radio Club in Richardson, Texas?
Sure.
Okay. We just installed one of the new ICOM mixed mode repeaters. We're not on a gateway yet. And we have a number of our folks who have no idea what D-Star is.
Yeah. I like it. I mean, I was an early adopter. I see you were an early adopter too. So I was actually, hold on, let me share. What's going on, Eric? How you doing, buddy?
Always the second Thursday of the month.
Okay.
So
We got some news for Tim.
So I was going to show this too. You can do like a gateway registration check. So look, I'm going to type in your call sign here. KR1ZAN.
September 14th.
Yeah.
So see, I can see when you actually registered, 2009. You were an early adopter of it.
What do I need? If I'm going to do a PowerPoint, what do I need to bring in?
And then it can show your last heard. So see, last heard.
Okay.
So last heard on an actual repeater looks like 2018.
I think
that
that's
call
when
sign.
I did a demo with Eric.
Well,
There
I
you
do
go.
It looks
The
like it's an
K5T
HRO location.
K5TIT repeater.
Yeah.
Again,
So,
That's downtown Dallas.
if you don't have
there you
internet,
go.
it seems to
So let's
internet
let's
goes
do
down.
N1 RXR.
I'm giving a talk.
Nice. You can see he actually has a bunch of different terminals registered here. T, D, P, C's, S, Z. Z is typically if you're using like a 70. So do you have a 705 by chance, Eric?
No, I don't.
Put it up in between.
I didn't hear you.
Yeah, sorry.
Thank you, Brad.
No, I don't, Cory.
Oh, okay. A lot of people who have the 705s, you can use terminal mode, and they use their call sign space Z for device ID on that.
I use terminal mode on my 9700.
Oh, that's why. Okay, so yep, there you go. It's because terminal mode. They recommend you use the Z. Yep, there you go.
Right. Right. I have it on the 9700, but not on the 7300.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So here's a real life look of reflector 39. So 39, Charlie, is actually the Maine state of Maine reflector. So N1 MRE was the last one to key up, and you see how he has an orange call sign. So he keyed up today at 4:10 this afternoon. So if I click on this, it's gonna open up a Google map and see he was in Bridgeton, right off of the Woods Pond Road.
Cool.
So you think about that, one day I want to run like a Dempsey challenge or some kind of event where you need that tracking. I think that would be really awesome. Because a lot of times we're running two radios, right? We're running one to talk and one for APRS. Wouldn't it be nice to just run one radio? So different things you can
Yeah.
use there. So there, I just want to show some of that stuff there.
Thanks a bunch.
Cool.
Yes, thank you very much, Cory. Appreciate you taking the time out of your evening to do this with us tonight.
Well, thanks for inviting me, Zach.